me a little bit because I'm a veteran and Harvey's a veteran here. Harvey served 3 years active duty, one which was in Korea in the Army. He served a total of 5 years active reserve duty in the 4th Brigade, 80th Division, Fort Story, Virginia, as a company commander and later a battalion personnel officer. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, please give a warm welcome to our guest speaker, Commonwealth Attorney Harvey Bryant.
Thank you, Ken, and thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to be here this morning, and I appreciate the invitation. I'm a little surprised with all the elections going on that, can you hear me out there? Can you hear me back there? No? Hello? How about this, if I shout a little bit? All right. Might do better without this. I thought what I would do this morning is do a little educational piece, because as I go around town and speak to various groups and organizations, I find that there's some lack of information on what the Commonwealth Attorney's Office does, first of all, and second of all, how our criminal justice process works in Virginia, and more specifically, of course, in Virginia Beach. Commonwealth attorneys, along with clerks of court, circuit court, the treasurer, the commissioner of revenue, and the sheriff are constitutional officers, meaning that our election is called for by the Virginia State Constitution. All of us. If I move back here, is that better?
Yeah.
All right, it's picking up better. I'm not going to be able to walk around. That's fine. Feel like I'm handcuffed here. Anyway, our election is called for by the Virginia Constitution, and all of us have 4-year terms except the clerk of circuit court, who has an 8-year term, and the rest of us are very, very envious of that. But it means that, and I mean this with a sort of tongue-in-cheek, that constitutional officers are the only locally elected officials who work full-time. And have a full-time job. And our jobs are described by law, what our duties are and what we are supposed to do. In the case of Commonwealth attorneys, there's 120 Commonwealth attorneys across the state of Virginia. Every city and every county has its own Commonwealth attorney. And the Commonwealth Attorney's Office's job is to prosecute violations of state law. We do all the criminal law. There's a city attorney or a county attorney to do the non-criminal legal matters that come up in those jurisdictions. Jimmy's trying to help me here, and Ken's back here. I've got all sorts of support. All right, I'm ready for the next slide, Jimmy, please. Okay, we talked about the fact that I have a staff of 87 people, 35 attorneys. We prosecute some 16,000 criminal cases per year in the city of Virginia Beach. We also do, that's felonies as well as misdemeanor appeals. We practice in 3 different levels of court: juvenile, domestic relations, general district court, and the circuit court, which in Virginia is the highest level of court. That's the only level of court in which you will find jury trials. So we have those folks in there. While we're talking about my staff, I want to take time to introduce Damaris Ledbetter, who's with my administrative support group. She and her husband and mother are there. She's fairly new with the office. Eleanor Gaines is one of my fine attorneys who's here, and appreciate all her work. Gordy Upkus, who's a mainstay here in the party, as well as in my office, is here. David Laird, who's one of my deputies. They're in charge of trial teams. And Phil Hollowell, also one of my deputies. My chief deputy, Colin Stolley, who's sort of like the XO in the military parlance, and also a former chairperson of this organization. And then Scott Alleman. I left Scott till last because you heard Ken mention that I'm on the governor's asset forfeiture work group. One of the things that Scott does in our office is do asset forfeiture. What is that? That means he goes after drug dealers' assets. Their money, their cars, their jewelry, their televisions, everything. And I'm proud to report that Virginia Beach in 2010 led the entire state of Virginia in the amount of money that we forfeited. And that money goes, a large portion of it, the majority of it goes to our police department to be used to buy equipment and that sort of thing. Some of it goes to the Department of Criminal Justice Services at the state, and some of it comes back to our office to be used for training and equipment and that sort of limited area. So we're doing a lot of things in our office. I think the figure for 2010 was $700 and some thousand, almost $800,000, and that exceeded the state police, which are covering the whole state of Virginia. So our police department and Scott done a heck of a job. We can have the next slide, please. Okay, the felony versus misdemeanor, a lot of people don't understand what that means. It simply means what is the punishment. If the punishment for the crime carries a year or more in jail or prison, that's the definition of a felony. If it carries a year or 12 months or less, then that's a misdemeanor. I'm trying to move fast because all these people I just introduced, they have to get back to work this morning. All right, next. You know, one of the things that drives what we do in every area of our city, but especially in the criminal justice system, is our size. This says approximately 435,000 people. The last census said it's more like 437,000 if you want to, add another 2,000 people there. So when you hear numbers like 16,000 criminal cases, it makes you think, well, gee whiz. I thought we say we have one of the safest cities in America for a city our size, and that is true, but you have to remember we're dealing with 437,000 people. We have some 900 police officers working 3 shifts a day. But and we've got over 400 deputy sheriffs, so it takes a lot of people to make us the safest city in America for a city our size. But you know what the best deterrent to crime is that we have? Beyond these 900 police officers trying to cover a city this size with this many people, 3 shifts a day, 24 hours a day, beyond all the sheriff's deputies, the best deterrent to crime in the city is you and I, the people who are sitting here. Because we're the ones that got to lock our doors, keep our windows shut, don't leave our cars running in the driveway or at the shopping center so somebody can jump in and take it. And we're the ones that are really the best eyes and ears for law enforcement. So we have to do what they are telling us in the airports. If you see something, say something. And you can do that through either 911 or 311 or letting somebody know. I hope your civic leagues where you are very active and helping your precincts be aware of the fact that you're out there. Everybody here know what precinct they live in? I hope you do. If you don't, try to go home and find out. Virginia Beach has 4 precincts. The first precinct, which is, this is rough approximations now, is the courthouse area and beyond. Second precinct is the oceanfront area and up toward the west. Third precinct is sort of the Bayside area, and I'm just being real general here. And fourth precinct is essentially the Kempsville area and shortly beyond there. So let's have the next slide. We talked about the 3 levels of court, 22 judges altogether. Next slide. All right, this is the legal process. This is how it happens. A crime occurs, suspect identified, and arrested. So we're going to use the example of robbery of a Wawa. Let's go to the next slide. Police officer, it says visits, goes to the magistrate's office, and that police officer, under oath, verbally tells the magistrate what the evidence is that caused him or gave him probable cause. That's the standard, probable cause that this person committed a particular crime. After that, every adult in Virginia is entitled to a preliminary hearing, also called a probable cause hearing, which occurs in the General District Court level of our court system in Virginia. At that probable cause or preliminary hearing, one of my assistants or myself is there to present the Commonwealth's evidence. The defendant is there with his or her attorney, and there's a General District Court judge to hear the evidence that we put on. The Commonwealth or the prosecution's burden at these preliminary hearings was again to meet the same standard the police officer had to set in front of the magistrate, and that is it probable that this person committed the robbery of the Wawa, and probable that what their actions constituted robbery. If that General District Court judge finds those 2 probabilities, then the case is, next slide, sent on to the grand jury in circuit court. Grand jury consists of 7 to 11 citizens who come in, and guess who goes in to see those 7 to 11 citizens and present the case to them? Not me, not my prosecutors, there's no court reporter, there's no judge in there. The police officer goes back in there and again verbally tells them under oath what the case is about, and the grand jury for the third time in the process then decides, is it probable that these events constituted a robbery, and is it probable that this is the person who did it? And if they find those two probabilities, then they return a true bill, an indictment. Then the case is set for trial either by judge or by jury in circuit court, and our burden goes way up at that point to what you've all heard in the movies and TV. At that point, we have to prove the case beyond a
shadow of a doubt.
No, not shadow of a doubt. No, that's not true.
Reasonable doubt.
Reasonable.
You flunked law
I'm
school.
just teasing. You have to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt, or as I like to phrase it, beyond doubts that are reasonable. There's all sorts of unreasonable doubts, but our burden at that point is to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt, and there we put on all the evidence that we have that we think is necessary to convince a judge or a jury of this person's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Of course, the defendant, when we have completed our case, puts on their evidence to try to throw doubt on what the Commonwealth's evidence is so that some one or more people on the jury will have a reasonable doubt. That's what the defense tries to do. If they find the defendant guilty, then we go to the sentencing phase. When I first started this business, when a jury found the person guilty, while they were back there deciding guilt or innocence, if they found them guilty, they also set their sentence, which meant what? A lot of defendants would go to trial, not take the witness stand, and therefore the jury would not know whether or not they had a prior criminal record, because while the prosecution can't bring up someone's prior criminal record in a trial unless that person takes a stand. And then we can ask them, have you ever been convicted of a felony, and how many, or have you ever been convicted of certain misdemeanors which are considered crimes of moral turpitude. So a jury would go back there and not know anything about this person's background and come out maybe with a sentence that was awful light, thinking, well, he's never done this before, so let's cut him a break a little bit on the sentencing. Our legislature, in their wisdom, decided this is not right, and I don't know, 15, 20 years ago now, decided that we would have what's called a bifurcated trial. So once they find him guilty, that jury comes back out, and we get to present evidence of the defendant's prior record. And boy, I love that part, because you can see their mouths drop open. You know, the defense attorney has presented this person as the choir boy who went wrong and needed some money. He was gonna take the money from the Wawa and go help the homeless. You know, something ridiculous like that. And I'm exaggerating to some extent, but they're trying to paint their defendant as just a nice guy who went wrong. And then when we're able to present that he's had 3 or 4 prior felonies and that sort of thing, they go like. So it does give us more of a truth in sentencing, in that the jury has a better idea of what they're dealing with when they sentence these folks. So we've been very happy to have that in our law. You know, there are some people in our society who think we should take sentencing out of the hands of juries in Virginia. And Virginia is just one of 4 states that has what I consider to be jury sentencing in the system that we have. But I don't think that we should ever give that up. And you as citizens should always resist them taking away from our juries the right to recommend what the sentence should be. And I'll tell you why. This is the best example of it in the world. We have very few juries in Virginia Beach involving drug dealers. And that's because my office, we have a policy that we will not plea bargain or make sentencing recommendations for people who are charged with manufacturing or distributing or selling illegal narcotics. They only have one choice. They can plead guilty and let the judge sentence them, or they can go to trial with a jury. And very, very few of them want to go to trial with the jury because they know that you hate drug dealers and you're going to give them a much higher sentence than what the judge will give them. And we've proven that over and over and over and over again ever since we've had that policy in our office. So they don't want a jury sentencing them. All right. The organizational chart, I'm just going to run through this very fast because I know we've got a lot of other things to do this morning. I have my office divided up into 6 different trial teams. Each precinct has its own trial team headed up by one of my deputies, and they concentrate on the crimes that occur in the precinct for which their team is created. We have a juvenile team that does about 20, well actually we're up to almost 4,000 domestic violence cases in the city of Virginia Beach on an annual basis. That's another sadness we could talk about for a long time. But at any rate, that team does those, and about 2,500 juvenile defendants who are committing crimes that would be felonies if they were adults. So that's what that team does. And then we have in essence, a drug team. We call it the Special Prosecutions Team because they also do gambling cases and prostitution cases and other things like that. And David Laird is in charge of that Special Prosecutions Team. So he's the guy who is guiding all the prosecutions of drug dealers in the city of Virginia Beach. And that's also the same team that has the asset forfeiture attorney. So that's a very, very key team in our city. All right, Jimmy, next one. Skip. How to find information about my office other than having me come in here about every 18 months and talk to you. Yeah, you can go to, this is a great website. The City of Virginia Beach recently changed the format and the face of their website. But if you go to www.pbgov.com and then click on government and then click on, well, there's 2 ways to get there, elected officials or departments. Then you'll get the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, and you'll get the background and the organizational structure of everything we've talked about here today, as well as the press releases that we issue on a regular basis that tell what's going on in our courts and our courtrooms and who's being prosecuted and the sentences that we're getting and what the evidence was, that sort of thing. Great source of information on my office, but also an awful lot of information that you can get about what's going on in the city of Virginia Beach. All right, Jimmy, what we got next? Okay, that's the face page that you'll find at pbgov.com. Talked about our news releases, and that's it, because we're trying to stay within the parameters here. All right, questions, real quick.
We'll take some questions. I'll start with Steve right up front here.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Steve. Mike.
Could you explain the ratio of plea bargains to trials and whether that number is going up or down, and if so, why?
All right, the ratio, he wants to know the ratio of plea bargains to trials and whether that number is going up or down or why. I think that probably, this is a guesstimation. We probably are having plea bargains in 60% of our cases. And trials have become more and more rare, as jury trials at least, as our office and as law enforcement has gotten more tools over the years. A lot of times what has happened is there's been more charges that are necessary to get the sentence that we're after, and so we will drop certain charges if they will plead guilty and then have the judge sentence them, or we make a sentencing recommendation. But the system here and throughout the United States could not function without plea bargains. I know that's a dirty word in most citizens' mind. It's right up there with child abuse. But sometimes we're not making sentencing recommendations. We're just not prosecuting certain charges, and the law requires that there be a written plea agreement. So sometimes we're giving up innocuous, meaningful stuff, but because it's something the prosecution is conceding, the law requires a written plea agreement, and that's where we are. Are they going up or down? I think we're pretty steady, don't you guys, in terms of the percentage of cases. Next question.
Next question from Jeannie.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Mike.
Okay, I don't need this. Anyway, you mentioned 435,000 citizens. Does that mean residents or citizens of the city? What's the definition?
Well, it's whatever the Census Bureau defines as a resident. They're living, they're housed, they live within the city of Virginia Beach, 437,000. For those of you who might not understand these kind of numbers, that makes us by far the biggest city in Virginia. We're 200,000 people more than the city of Richmond, close to 200,000 more than the city of Norfolk. When I grew up here, growing up over in Portsmouth, Norfolk and Richmond were by far the biggest cities. That was the big city. Now it's us, but there's a lot of people in Virginia Beach that don't realize it's us. The only jurisdiction in the entire state that's bigger in terms of number of people than the city of Virginia Beach is Fairfax County, which has close to 1 million people. Other than that, we're it. And in terms of cities, we're the biggest city by far.
Okay, now we have tourists, a large number of tourists,
Mhm.
and also aliens, if you want to call it that, from other states,
Yes.
other areas. So that's not included.
That's not included
Okay,
in the
thank you.
permanent population figure. So we're actually dealing with a lot more than
Yes.
437,000
That's
people,
right.
which I think was your point.
That's right. Thank you.
Let me say one thing that about the numbers that we have here too. I want to stress driving under the influence. The City of Virginia Beach Police Department accounts for 10% of the DUI arrests that occur in the entire state of Virginia. There's something like 25,000 DUI arrests per year statewide. The City of Virginia Beach Police Department accounts for about 2,500 of those. And there's the reason for that is I think we have a very good enforcement procedure in Virginia. We have a special team that is trained in identifying people who are driving drunk, and we have a lot of great enforcement here in the city of Virginia Beach in terms of that. And our office vigorously prosecutes DUIs. You're not going to find us making plea agreements in DUIs, I can tell you that. All right?
Next question.
Next question.
Morning.
Good morning.
On this asset forfeiture,
Uh-huh.
are these assets forfeited prior to being convicted or after being convicted?
Well, we have to get the conviction first. We start the process civilly. It's a civil procedure that's done all over the state. The feds do it too. Our statute models exactly what the federal law is and how to do this. And so, yes, it's prior to their conviction, although since it's a civil matter, the defendant and his lawyer are entitled to say, we're not going to fight that, go ahead and take it. And that's what happens an awful lot of the time.
Next question back here.
Good morning, Harvey.
Good morning.
My question concerns on the jury side.
Yes.
Who makes sure that there's a large enough jury pool for all the courts?
Who makes sure that? The clerk's office and the court system subpoenas about 800 people per month, not subpoenas, but lays that number of people on for jury duty to make sure that we have an adequate pool. So there's no question about do we have enough. A jury panel under the law, that's not your question?
No, I disagree with your last statement. That it's ensured that there's enough of qualified jury pool.
Well, now qualified, that's in the mind of the beholder. What we have
Just
to...
having enough there on certain days.
Do we have enough there on certain days? Actually, we probably, from my experience, and we're right there in the courthouse 5 days a week, 12 months a year, 52 weeks a year, is we often have jurors come in who are not used because they come in for a civil trial or a criminal trial and the civil case gets settled or the defendant decides to plead guilty, such as we had on Monday of this week right here. And that jury sat down there for probably 2.5 hours and was not used. In my entire time at Virginia Beach, I've never known us not to have enough jurors to conduct a jury trial. Any of you all?
Extremely rare.
Yeah.
Once or twice.
To start a jury, you've got to have a minimum of 20 what's considered qualified jurors, and then each side gets to eliminate 4 so that you get down to the 12 jurors that you need. But if you're aware of a problem where we don't have enough people, I would, I'm not the one and it's not our responsibility to call them in, but I don't know of any instances where a judge has had to say to the parties involved, we can't have a jury today because we don't have enough jurors.
I do.
Okay. In Virginia Beach?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Judge Tom Shadrick. Remember, I think your office prosecuted the Linda Johnson case back in 2004, the lady with 96 cats.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Shadrick sat right in that courtroom and said, well, we didn't order a jury for today. and put that woman in the impossible position of, do we let our animals sit in that substandard shelter for another 90 days, or do we take our chances before the judge, who just happens to be the next door neighbor of Sharon Adams, director of the Beach SPCA? That woman was screwed, blued, and tattooed by this city.
Well, I think maybe what happened there, Jim, was first of all, that was 6 years ago, but probably what happened was she came in and asked for a jury on the day of trial. Now, if you do that, there's not...
No, sir.
Okay. Well,
Harvey, next question back here.
Next question.
All right.
Yes, sir, could you give us some indication, it might be zero, but the impact of illegals here, both in numbers and in dollars, or do you see any impact on that population?
Well, we have people who are here illegally who commit crimes. There's no question about that. Are they committing crimes at a higher percentage based on their percentage in our population than the actual residents? I think the answer is no. We're seeing them, but they're committing some of the same crimes that somebody in your neighborhood may commit, but they're not committing them, I don't think, at any higher percentage or higher volume than our actual, local boys.
But do we keep track of how many of them there are, so that we know how much,
Sure.
how much time they're taking in the system, but because they're not really taxpayers,
Well, all that's being reported to ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, when they're arrested. And it's the federal government who tracks that part of it. Our jail keeps, the sheriff's office, through the good auspices of Dennis Free, tracks all those statistics also. So they're very much on top of that. Dollar figure, I really don't know what the dollar figure is. All right, we're running out of time.
Yeah, next question.
I'm happy to answer questions, but we got a lot of people who want to speak to you.
One more question from back here.
Okay, one more question.
How you doing? I know that down in Georgia, the recent case with the Troy Davis situation. But what is the state? Well, I'm from North Carolina. You're saying state, so what is the Commonwealth Attorney's office doing to avoid the same fiasco that happened down there?
Well, you term it a fiasco, and I'm not so sure it was a fiasco, because I don't know all the facts or evidence about that. What we do is what I hope every decent prosecutor's office does, and that is we go over the evidence ourselves, and if we're not convinced in my office that there's a substantial likelihood of a conviction, we don't prosecute the case. I want to tell you right now, recantation is the new thing for defense attorneys. People who said something, 12 years ago, and then want to come back and say, well, I really didn't mean it. I lied. And it's sort of the new thing right now. We went through that, you may remember, with the two SEALs, Brown and Turner. They were both convicted back in 1997, got enormous amount of time. Both had inculpatory statements, and Brown said Dustin Turner was into it up to his eyeballs. Well, years later he comes out and says, no, you know what, not really, it was all me. Well, the case wasn't even tried on the theory that they both killed her. It was tried on a what's called felony murder rule. So it didn't matter who actually killed that poor girl, because they were both into it, both had participated in the murder, and that's what the jury believed. We went through a long hearing here. Judge Lowe found that the recantation was, quote, credible. It went to our Court of Appeals. They said no, and our Virginia Supreme Court just recently said it doesn't matter at this point. So at this point, he's not getting out of custody. But what we do, to answer your question, is we try to evaluate the evidence as carefully as we can. People who are willing to come forward and testify and say under oath, this is what happened, this is what the jury relies on, this is what the jury believes. And it's just so, it's very easy to come back later and say, well, I didn't really mean it because for whatever reason. That case, like every capital murder case, is gone over with a fine-tooth comb at every appellate level of court in every state, all the way up through the Supreme Court of the United States. And in that case, they didn't find any error or find any reason to reverse the case. Now, I know there's some issues there, but That's all I can tell you is about what prosecutors do. Are there rogue prosecutors sometimes, and people who get off the reservation? Yes, but I don't think, I guess the biggest example is this guy down in Durham with the lacrosse case. But in essence, good prosecutors across the country, the last thing we want to do is convict somebody who didn't commit the crime, or convict them of a higher level than what they were actually involved in. So hopefully it doesn't happen. Nobody wants that to happen. I can tell you that. And we put in as many safeguards as we can to prevent it from happening. Some people think it happened in Georgia. I frankly don't know, except that I know that recantation is now the new thing to get people out of jail.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, please thank Harvey Bryant.